Are you excited or curious about the future? Does your job depend on it? Futurized goes beneath the trends, tracking the underlying forces of disruption in tech, policy, business models, social dynamics, and the environment. I am Trond Arne Undheim, futurist, author, and serial entrepreneur, originally from Norway, now based outside of Boston. I'm the co-founder of Yegi, the discovery engine. With background from MIT Startup Exchange, MIT Sloan School of Management, WPP, Oracle, and the EU, I'm passionate about the societal impact of deep tech, such as AI, blockchain, IoT, life science, and robotics. Intrigued yet? Go to futurized.co to subscribe and listen in. On the show, I interview smart people with a soul, founders, authors, and executives. Futurized, a bi-weekly show preparing you to deal with disruption.
Sidney, I'm so happy to have you here with us today on Futurized.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
So, what I thought we would do is discuss a little bit what's happening, in the field of family offices, and what the future looks like a little bit.
Sure. Interesting.
But first of all, I wanted to think a little bit about your background, because to find a Dutch person in a Bahraini family office, who I understood it wasn't really your background.
Yeah, it's
How did you get here?
it's one of those confluences of many different events. So I am Dutch. I don't look it. I'm about a meter too short to be a real Dutch person, but I can verify that I'm Dutch. We moved to Bahrain when I was 3 years old. My dad found a job there, not in the oil and gas business, oddly enough, but in the flowers business, because at that time the hotels and the airlines were just starting to boom in this area, and they wanted to have fresh cut flowers everywhere and beautiful gardens and things like that. So my dad came here to actually help build up a network, import flowers from Holland, because that's what we're very well known for. So I grew up in Bahrain, and I stayed there until I was 17. Then I moved back to Holland. I never went to university, unfortunately, because I didn't really speak Dutch. So I just started working, and my idea was to work for a year, pick up the language, and then go to university, pick a major, the normal stuff. But I got addicted to working. I really enjoyed working, and I found that I was just very good at doing things. So I got promoted quite quickly, and I never really looked back. I moved back to Bahrain in 2009. And as you mentioned, it's not easy to get into a family office, first of all, but into a royal family office, it's quite difficult. There's a lot of trust issues. It's not like you can just, put out an ad to a recruitment agency.
Yeah, I wouldn't assume that.
At all. You don't do a ZipRecruiter, for example. So it's just purely by coincidence. I was unhappy where I was working at the time, which was in the environmental field in Saudi Arabia. And I just happened to call a friend, and I didn't even know he worked for a royal family office, because he always represented himself as, working for a very specific company under the umbrella. And he just so happened to want to move back to Malaysia. And they wouldn't let him go until he found a replacement. So
So you needed each other.
Yeah, very much so. And this all happened within 2 or 3 days of each other. So it's very, it's very interesting how that works. And he said, please come tomorrow. We're going to interview you. I said, oh, okay. And that's how I started. I started out in the oil and gas sector of, let's say, the portfolio companies, because it takes a long time to, gain trust. And my background is not really investing, but it's where I've sort of found my passion. I've always been good with numbers, but I never really understood what investing was. I know this sounds really at odds with each other, but when you work in a corporate environment for a long time, the money element is sort of removed. It sort of becomes mechanical, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So I never really thought about investing, or what investing means, or what it means to put in 1,000 and get 2,000 back, or to build something from nothing. I never really had that entrepreneurial background. I've always been interested in things, technology and stuff like that. But I sort of found my passion there again. So I started pursuing, my MBA, pursuing my CFA, and sort of really building up that sort of academic knowledge, and at the same time, poring over entrepreneurial literature, investment literature, and that's where we are today. It's I've been amazingly lucky. That's all I can say.
Tell me, well, that is a fantastic story. Tell me a little bit more about where you are today. So you are obviously involved with a very reputable family office in Bahrain. You're involved both on their industry side, so you actually run companies for them, and then you invest, in what exactly?
So on the company side, I don't run the day-to-day. That would be impossible. But where you would traditionally have a board, I sort of become the board on behalf of the chairman. And I steer them, and we sort of look at, the strategic outlay for the next 5-10 years. Sometimes our portfolio companies need investment as well. So on a micro level, we're always investing and reinvesting into our companies. In terms of investing, and I'm not going to speak for worldwide family offices, I'm going to very specifically speak about the Middle East. We are still very traditional, meaning, bricks and mortar. If you can touch it, if you can feel it, it's investable, right? There's not a very mature mentality around venture investing or even tech investing. And that is really where my passion lies. So I'm trying to pull specifically our family office forward. But that's really why I also attend conferences like this, to talk about things like digital assets and moving into a more, I wouldn't say risky investment strategy, but a more forward-looking investment strategy. And I think, oddly enough, that's one of the good things that's coming out of COVID. Although I don't like to say things like that. It's been terrible worldwide. It's destroyed a lot of wealth. But one of the good things is we are fast-forwarding. People love to say 10 years. I'm thinking it's going to be 20 years.
How so 20 years? I mean, are you talking in terms of how the technology is advancing, or do you mean culturally also in the priorities? For instance, in your case, with the family office moving from investing purely in extractive industries, in your case, I guess, and then perhaps, diversification, meaning other very big corporate conglomerate type industries, to moving into technology in a big way.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say it's a little bit of both. So in terms of, forget technology for a minute. Think again about the stuff we just described, brick and mortar. Brick and commercial real estate is going to be devastated. It just is. There will always be a place for commercial real estate, but the sprawling malls, and especially you've been here now in Dubai for probably a few days.
Yeah.
So how many malls have you seen?
Well, many. I just haven't been inside them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's lots and lots of malls, which traditionally has been fine. Yeah. People love to go out shopping. But I think that has pretty much forever changed. You'll still go out to have fun. They will be entertainment destinations. But these sort of sprawling retail gargantuan buildings with endless shops, right, I don't think they're going to survive.
Well, it's going to be hard to, if you're going to actually operate them in some safe way, right? You need to completely retrofit them or build new ones that are, if we are living with this virus.
It's not even,
but it's maybe culturally, you're saying?
I don't even specifically mean the virus. So, and I'm going to speak anecdotally first, which is my wife has never ordered as much online as she has now. And she's loving it. She doesn't want to ever go into a shop again, right? So it is sort of a cultural shift. It's not even will the malls ever be safe again? Will they ever be attractive as a destination again? And they will be. I mean, you'll still want to maybe go to the cinema or go to a restaurant or what have you. But sort of having, 250 stores to buy a shirt kind of seems ridiculous now. Right? And I think in the future it will continue to seem even more ridiculous. So
well, if you're right about that, that has massive significance on the commercial real estate market.
I think so. I think hotels are going to be forever changed, and the reason I say hotels are forever changed is the biggest holder of rooms in the world today is Airbnb. And I don't know if you've ever used an Airbnb.
Sure.
But even before this whole COVID crisis, I was addicted to Airbnbs. The only reason I'm in a hotel today is because someone else is paying for it. If it were up to me, I would just take an Airbnb. And I think that sort of that unique experience you get with an Airbnb, which makes sure that you're safe, you have a safe environment for your family. I think people are going to get addicted to that. And I think
there's also less people involved, right? So it's true. You're always going to be in someone else's place, and you don't know fully exactly what's happened, in terms of cleaning of that place. But with better, services there, at least you're not in, again, like a mall-like environment with many more people.
I believe what Airbnb will do ultimately is they will create a badge, which is, if you as an operator can sort of guarantee that, X, Y, Z steps were done, you'll get, the ultimate cleanliness badge or sterilization badge or whatever it may be. And people want to be certified. Yeah. And I think Airbnb has been smart enough to sort of see those trends. They've made super hosts, they've done super experiences and things like that. They're smart enough to realize that this is an opportunity.
So you are seeing a lot of advantages business-wise in terms of kind of ushering us into a new time. But if you look at family offices, isn't it true that for a little while now, at least the more forward-thinking people, including some who come to this summit, have been discussing investing in other things than real estate and extractive industries for some years, but maybe not for long?
So I've heard a lot of talk as well. I've seen very little actual investing, right? I truly think that's going to change. I think we have literally reached an inflection point. And I see that in all kinds of industries, even just in the car industries, right? We've literally just reached an inflection point. And I think you're definitely going to see much more investing into these alternative asset classes as the real estate goes barren, as the flats are empty, as the malls are empty, as office spaces disappear.
But if these investment strategies are going to change, won't the entire approach to investing also have to change? Because speaking as someone who is involved in startup investments and startup partnerships, even just on the corporate side, it has taken corporate investors, I would say, around about a decade to fully to start to understand startups, right? Even corporates, and we're not, family offices is kind of once removed, right?
Sure.
Corporates, it took them a decade to really understand the logic of startups and how do you invest in one, why are you investing in one, even during or how do you get value out of it, right? Which is partnerships and stuff like that. How is that, and even how do you get access? I think you and I had a little discussion on the phone about deal flow, and you said deal flow is like water. Now I wanted to challenge you on that, because if deal flow is like water, that's fine, but water's water, but deals are different. So
Sure.
Surely you don't have access to every deal. You have access to enough deals, perhaps.
Sure.
But in technology, if you're not in the right deal, you don't get the right alpha.
Sure. So that's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I know.
So I'm going to take them one by one. First of all, I'd say actually corporations are probably at a disadvantage to family offices because their time horizons are way shorter.
Right.
The only mentality shift that has to change in family office, in my opinion, is you have to stop seeing your assets as sort of fixed income, right? You have to shift it from thinking about bonds and moving it more to equity side.
Yeah.
So if you have a building, you start to think of it like a fixed income. I invest X and I'll get Z per month. It's 10%, 20%, whatever the calculation may be. Startup investing is completely different. And I would say if you are not committed to it, go invest in a fund that is specialized in it. Go invest in a venture fund. Go invest in 10 venture funds, right? Because you definitely will not be able to find one unique startup, invest in it once, and have it have that 10,000 times outcome. It just doesn't exist. Yeah. The only way to do it is to invest in 1,000 companies and see 990 of them just fail.
But do you see family offices going into venture funds in a bigger way than before?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Percentage-wise of portfolio, how much do you think a reasonable exposure is these days, or now, should be now, going forward?
It really depends on the size of your office, risk appetite, existing portfolio. Safely, I would say 10%. put 10% into venture.
How does that match with other asset classes? Right now, like real estate, what is over 50?
Definitely over 50.
Yeah.
For most family
maybe
offices
even
here,
75.
probably, because most family offices probably got rich because of real estate.
Yeah.
Right. So it'll make up a huge portion of their portfolio. If not, then oil and gas.
Right.
And then from oil and gas into real estate. You know, they sort of feed off each other. But I think 10% would be a good amount. It's enough to be interesting, and then your team can be educated and sort of start to get a feel for it. Because if you're not invested in it, you don't really pay attention to it. You know, I mean, I look at a lot of startups, but I don't look at much as the startups as the ones I've invested in.
Sure.
Those I follow religiously. So you have to have your feet in the water. You have to have skin in the game. You can't just sit on the sidelines and say, we're going to do it, we're going to do it, we're going to do it. Just do it. It's difficult to get even into certain venture funds because, the really good ones, it's like a private club. It's not
they get oversubscribed.
They get oversubscribed very easily. Even when they do shoot-off funds or second funds or third funds, there's plenty of cash in the world. So I think that answers the first part of your question. Now, the second part of your question is where you challenged me on sort of the deal flow and getting access to deal flow.
Yeah.
Now, I agree with you. Not all deal flow is the same, 100%. And the only way to get really the best of the best of the best deal flow is to really be with a very good venture person, because they get to see, they get first look. Or to be partnered with a good accelerator or with a good seed stage company. Like, for example, we invest with, do you know Jason Calacanis? So we invest into his funds, and he gets all the best deal flow. And therefore, we get the best deal flow. Although I'm sure he gets even better deal flow that he doesn't share with everybody.
Yeah.
But so there's ways of getting deal flow. You don't necessarily have to be in Silicon Valley. And in a way, it's actually a little bit advantageous because you miss a lot of the garbage as well. Because you have to admit, there are a lot of startups which are just a waste of time.
For sure. Do you ever collaborate directly with corporates? Yeah, I'm part of a corporate environment called Global Corporate Venturing that has similar to this, have annual meetings and stuff, and there's a community of corporate investors. Do you see that family offices and corporates could have something in common when it comes to looking at deals or collaborating?
Absolutely. I mean, in the end, everybody's objectives are more or less the same. We want to put X in, and we want to triple or quadruple that, hopefully. So as long as those are aligned, there's always a way to work together. The only difference I would say with corporates is, with corporates there's much more of a quarter-to-quarter mandate, which is difficult in the startup world and in the venture world. I mean,
Yeah.
You literally cannot judge a company that has potential exponential growth on a quarter-to-quarter basis. It's just not possible. If you shift the order of magnitude by just one, your whole next 3 quarters are messed up. But the exponential growth is still there, right? So I would say that as long as it's aligned, the incentives are aligned, there's definitely a way to work together. I think there's a lot that family offices can learn from corporates, for sure, and vice versa.
Tell me a little about some of the startups that you have invested in, either personally, because I understand you're also doing a little bit of investing on your own, or that you're getting involved with through your family office.
One of my favorite ones right now, and that's just because they secured another round of funding, is Fluent Forever, which is, I would say, a much better version of Duolingo, which has been, honestly, I invested in it before COVID, but it's been helped a lot by COVID. Because people are at home, they're thinking to themselves, what shall I do? Let me learn a language. And while Duolingo is great, we actually don't have a free tier. It's just purely subscriber based. Well, I say we, they.
Well, that shows you how much you're involved.
That's how passionate I am.
Yeah.
I have no influence on management whatsoever. But it's growing very well. It's one of my favorites. Another one that I really love, but that's because my career started out in logistics, specifically in trucking. So I found a great startup called Fleeting, which is basically trying to take the archaic way that we manage truckers and fleets of truckers and streamline them and make it easier for truckers to find jobs, et cetera, et cetera. I really see a lot of potential in that, even in an automated world.
Are you investing or thinking about automation largely? I mean, in manufacturing automation, robotics,
Not really.
augmentation?
Like I said, we are still very early into dipping our toes in. I mean, it is just, this year that we've started to venture out into the wild, wild west. So we're not that far yet, but it is sort of on my mind map horizon. And that's automation in everything. I mean, look at how cars have evolved in the last 5 years. And that's nothing compared to how they're going to evolve in the next 10 years. You're definitely going to see a lot more automated trucking, automated driving, robo-taxis, and so on and so forth. I think that one other thing that COVID has sort of done, which will definitely accelerate manufacturing trends, is a lot of countries and sovereigns are definitely thinking, how do we re-onshore companies? How do we re-onshore manufacturing?
Right.
And the only way to onshore manufacturing in any cost-effective way is through intense automation. So you're going to see a lot of investment there, for sure. So I believe in it. We're not there yet in terms of investing, but it's a space I'm intensely watching.
Tell me about this phenomenon that you obviously work for a family office, but you are a little bit more directly involved, obviously, in the deals, but in this case, more in the trends. So the trends that you have seen because of your work day to day, how is it for you personally, but also kind of in general in the Middle East when you work with family offices? And I'm understanding that they sometimes take foreign operators to help them out, but even if not, right, there's someone who's actually the CEO or who's executing on behalf of a family. How is that dialogue? What are the kinds of discussions that go into this? I mean, you have a little bit of an educational role as well, right?
For sure. See, the thing is, think about the last, let's say, 7 years. More has changed in the Middle East in the last 7 years than the last 40 years before that, because the trend was always up and to the right in terms of income from oil revenues, etc., etc. And not just from exploitation of oil or getting it out of the ground and exporting it, but actually refining it into high-class products, high-grade products. So no one really had to pay attention to any kind of other technological trend. It doesn't really matter. Electricity's cheap. We don't need to think about solar power. Labor is super cheap, so we don't have to think about automating anything.
So why then this change? Is it simply a factor of the oil price going sort of down, or what are the other things?
For sure, 100%. So you know how things work. When there's too much of something, there's no efficiency. So when there's too much money in a system, there's no efficiency in the system.
Well, it's funny you say this. I have never been to the UAE or Dubai before, but I'm Norwegian, and I have made some parallels. I think like the Emirates and Bahrain and other countries here are almost like they're very similar in the source of their wealth, and they found it at similar times in their history. Maybe here, obviously a little earlier, but it has had a transformative effect, but in different ways, right? And in Norway, not so much of the money has gone into actually, like it has in Dubai, and I don't know so much about Bahrain. You tell me about the changes that are happening now. But I was sort of making the reflection that Dubai is kind of like a city of the future. Almost kind of also kind of like capital gone unhinged, saying we're going to spend this and we're going to kind of make the future. Norway isn't quite there, right? They put it into a fund, thinking a rainy day fund, and now it's raining, right? COVID and 100%. Other things, and we're getting it back because guess what country can afford to vaccinate the population for free? Yeah, that's Norway. So, and I'm assuming some of the Emirates will apply for sure. Similar policies. But it is interesting that you made me think of it. When you've had one resource for 30 years or more.
Bahrain has had it since the 30s.
Right.
But I mean, in those days, oil didn't really have many uses. It was just bunkering and, a little bit of trains, a little bit of cars, tanks. That's it really. I would say, it's very interesting. Bahrain was actually You won't believe it. Bahrain was actually the most advanced country in the whole Middle East up until about the late 80s.
So what happened?
Well, so we were the first to discover oil. We were the first country to have air conditioning. First country to have schools, free healthcare, and so on and so forth. The challenge is, I mean, that never really went away. We still have that sort of wealth. Everyone else just became much richer, as tends to happen. At some point, we were the center of banking in the Middle East, which is a confluence of two events. One is the war in Lebanon, which caused all the banks, because that used to be the heart of banking in the Middle East, caused all the banks to look for a new home, as it were. So Bahrain welcomed them with open arms because we had a very liberal policy. And like I said, everyone else sort of grew around us, but it used to be that the leaders would send their kids to Bahrain to be educated from Saudi or from Emirates or from Oman even. So it's like you say, it's very interesting. What happens when you get a lot of resources suddenly? The only thing I would say that's probably different with Norway as well is we don't have taxes.
That is kind of different.
That is kind of different. Where are you guys at now?
Embarrassingly. There's a high number. But how does that even work?
What do you mean?
Well, there's no taxes, but how does the government run?
So the government budgets are just made up of income from oil and gas.
Right.
So they own the oil and gas assets.
Right.
I mean, they're run like a private company,
Yeah.
but the owner is the government. So it comes into the government budget.
Right.
That's why. So
okay, so I see what you're saying, because in Norway the taxes are used to run the country,
Yeah.
and the oil revenue goes into a fund.
Exactly.
And there's a very, very small amount of the revenue that can be used for day to day, and that's regulated. And this was a big debate, obviously, at some point. I think maybe a very smart investment.
Well, we'll see. Here's the smart part of what Norway did. So at some point, the governments here started running on budgets of $90 oil, $120 oil, crazy numbers.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that when the oil is pulled from the ground, it's not profitable. At $2, Saudi is still profitable. It just means that they can't balance the government budget.
Right.
So that means you have to start cutting costs in housing, medical, salaries, and so on and so forth. So I would say that probably what you've done is very wise. Put it all aside. And to be honest, 2018, 2019 was sort of the years that the sovereign wealth funds here started to really flex their muscles.
Yeah.
Mubadala, which is the sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi, actually has a really good venture arm. And they invest into a lot of different kinds of companies. Even PIF, which is the public investment fund in Saudi Arabia, I mean, we don't know for sure how much it is, but I would estimate they probably have around about $1 trillion at their disposal for investing in the country and outside the country.
Yeah.
So probably we're going to start following more the Norway model than you following our model, I would say.
Interesting. So tell me a little bit about how you see the region operating, because to outsiders it's slightly opaque. Obviously, you'd have to study each country in the Middle East separately, because
Sure.
you're kind of your own logic.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that it seems to me as an outsider that this trend that you're talking about is largely happening across the Middle East? This idea that we are going to diversify. Is it sort of for the same reason that you just outlined with Bahrain?
It's purely
so
because
the logic in all these economies, it sort of works the same way.
100%. And that's, again, if you have lots of money coming from a single source, you don't need to think about diversification. Although, let's say, for example, Bahrain, because we only produce around 50,000 barrels a day, plus or minus, we've had to think about diversification much earlier because our budgets are much smaller than the surrounding countries.
Right.
So we do have, let's say, a very mature aluminium smelter, which has been there since the early 80s. We do have a lot of different manufacturing companies.
I was going to say, I mean, isn't there a much softer transition surely happening also where you don't go straight to the most risky tech startup. I mean, there's a way to kind of go to more advanced oil and gas products and derivatives and you know, refined products, as you
for sure.
You know,
I mean,
and manufacturing would be, I guess, more a more sort of gradual step.
But what I would say is probably, and I'll speak now just as someone who lives in Bahrain, because I'm not so familiar with the Dubai scene. If you sort of encourage, you know, the startup space and the fintech space, those kind of things, you start developing these young entrepreneurs who are going to build those companies. So yes, there is a strategy for manufacturing. I mean, that's why we have, you know, fiberglass manufacturing, lots of different kinds of manufacturing going on, as well as expansion of banks, as well as expansion of lots of things. But the CBB, the Central Bank of Bahrain, at some point said, we need to become the center of banking again. And you're not going to become the center of banking again by brute forcing it. You can only do that if you lead in technology, if you lead in openness, et cetera, et cetera. So we probably have one of the most liberal, I would say, policies towards fintech adoption, cryptocurrency adoption, blockchain technology adoption, et cetera. We have a very liberal sandbox, regulatory sandbox, where people are allowed to play in. And if they do no harm, they're set out into the wild, which is why we had the first real operational crypto exchange launched in Bahrain, even though it's the smallest market, because they were allowed to play and, you know, dip their toes in for a year, prove to the regulators that it's not harmful, it can be managed, you can do all the due diligence on your customers, you don't necessarily know where the Bitcoin goes when it goes, but you know who sent it. So I would say it's still early days, but I think this is going to set us on a path which will take us, I don't know, 20 years faster than anyone else, just because of these sort of open policies that we have.
So what does the future look like for Bahrain? I know there's some vision work going on. There are some policy documents about, you know, 2030, 2040, 2050.
Look, everyone had a plan and then COVID hit. So now we have to sort of rethink our plans.
Yeah.
You know, technology comes forward 10 years, plans go backwards 10 years. Look, we have a 2030 vision, sure. And I think more than let's say economical, I would say it's a mindset vision. You know, we want to be the most open banking sector in the world. We want to be the most technologically advanced in the world. We want to have or in the region rather. We want to have, you know, the most amount of manufacturing in the region, and so on and so forth. And we want to have liberal policies to allow investment to come in. So I wouldn't measure, let's say, the vision by, you know, economic outcome, because today you just can't. But the seeds are being laid that once things, I don't want to say normalize, because who knows what normal means anymore, but once things stabilize, those seeds will grow pretty fast.
What are the limiting factors in Bahrain or around the Middle East? I mean, it's often claimed, of course, that it's, you know, there's some cultural issues surrounding, you know, legacy families and things. Would you say that has been historically kind of the, you know, aside from what we just talked about, which is the limit, the factor of having one industry with, you know, such attractive economics, but cultural factors, arguably, whether they are real or not, whatever they are, they move slower in theory. What is it that, is it just that the incentives have changed and become so much more attractive that people realize, you know, it's a trade-off, but we're going to adapt, and on balance, even if our culture might have to adapt a little bit, even towards more openness or, you know, less hierarchical. A lot of these structures that are part of traditional cultures and societies, there must be some who are saying, wait a second, this is going fast.
Not that I hear of, to be honest with you. So probably within individual family offices, you're always going to have a tension. There's always a tension. There's a tension between the grandfather, the father, the mother, the kids, the cousins. There's always going to be a tension. Especially, you know, think about it from this perspective. You have, you know, guys that started businesses in the 40s. They are now very old. Never went to university, never went to high school. They just started working when they were, you know, 10 years old. And yet their grandkids, you know, undergrad from Harvard, grad from MIT, and so on and so forth. So there's going to be a huge tension because the difference between those two cultures within the family is huge.
How do those tensions get resolved? I mean, is it essentially just everybody flexes a little? Because surely, you come back from Harvard and you have all these visionary ideas. You can't really just implement them, day one. How does that dynamic work?
It depends on family office to family office. I mean, you have, so there's, for example, the Kanu family. Kanu family is probably arguably the wealthiest family, a merchant family in the Middle East. And they're based in Bahrain. Their family office, you can't even really call it a family office anymore. It's a family corporation. Mm-hmm. And they are so professionally run that, if you are a family member but you're not qualified, you're not working there. Right?
That is different.
So that's one extreme. And then you have the other extreme where it's sort of, my son will become the CEO, even if he wants to be, in a rock band and has literally no interest in running a company.
Right.
So there's, and everything in between. Mostly the way those tensions get resolved is, look, there's a lot of respect here amongst, from younger to elder. You always defer to your elders. It's not like, in my family, you're 18, see you later. What are you still doing here? Why haven't you moved out yet? Yeah. It's not like that here. You still live with your parents, well into your 20s, 30s, and it's fine. You can get married and still live with your parents. So there's a lot of respect. So it tends to get resolved either through mutual respect or, here's 100K, go do it and let me know what happens. If he's successful, great. If not, come back and, work in the family business. But there's not really ever family feuds, I would say. There are notable ones, of course. I mean, nobody's perfect. But I would say they're few and far between.
What about collaboration across families and emirates and, this happens. Yeah. We're going to have to live with it, I think.
Cut.
Yeah. Why don't we do that? It's very annoying. Keep talking.
Does your card not have to go in the thing?
No, it's not the card. It's
So there's motion sensors?
Yeah, I tried to ask them about this, but no one was able to address the question.
So interesting.
We will find out.
All right. And action.
Action. So I was just thinking, cross families. Mm-hmm. What is the dynamic there in terms of either collaboration cross families, cross emirates? Like, to what extent is this actually a region where I believe you framed it this way for me. You said, well, it's no longer a zero-sum game, and people know that.
So it definitely used to be, right? Because we were all playing, or let's say the families were all playing within their region or within their area or within their country or what have you. So then at that point, it is absolutely a zero-sum game because there's limited land to build buildings, as we discussed before, limited opportunity for government contracts, and so on and so forth. There's also an element of tribalism, which is a cultural factor. I've worked with offices in Saudi Arabia where a family will literally never work with another family. They just won't. They would rather hire a family office from outside to come and work with them than to work with another family office. And that's just a cultural tribal thing, but it is changing quite rapidly because we're in a global game now. And in a global game, even though it seems like globalization is on the decline, it's really not. America's globalization is on the decline. Everyone else's is in my opinion, on the rise. So we're playing in a global playground now, and together we're stronger. So you are seeing collaborations, and this also comes from the fact that those two guys or girls went to Harvard together from those two different families, and they have a friendship, and they want to do something together. And they understand that, this one has skills that one doesn't have. Or, this family office has something that family office doesn't have. So in that respect, it is becoming more open. Not perfect yet, but again, nobody is.
If you think about this region in a kind of a decade context, where do you see this region moving? Is there now a unilateral movement towards more globalization and more diversification and the things we have talked about? And where would that lead us if it continues?
Sure. So certainly within the region, I think you're going to find a lot more cooperation. amongst the GCC countries. Okay, existing political tensions notwithstanding. But I think you will find a lot more cooperation, collaboration. I mean, it is pretty much already a free trade zone. You know, I can manufacture things and just sell them in the UAE, and it's not a problem. I think that will expand, probably to, you know, the countries in Lebanon, Egypt, and those kinds of countries. I think the new peace deals with Israel have opened, you know, a huge number of doors that we haven't even touched on. But in terms of technology,
that's gotten a lot of attention internationally.
Sure. Well, it's huge. I mean, if you had asked me 5 years ago, because I love to think about the future, you know, where's it going to be? I would have said in the exact same place it's always been, nowhere. But then I started to see signals. Okay, I'm lucky enough to work in, you know, certain circles, but I started to see signals, and, you know, I have Israeli friends, and I was talking to them, and they were starting to see signals within their government, and that was, you know, about 2 years ago. And I said, that's odd. And then suddenly there's a flight to Abu Dhabi of, you know, a sport minister from Israel to, you know, to have a look at the mosque. I say, well, that's interesting. That's, you know, and it's not like, it's nothing to do with trade. It's just a sport minister, just to come and look at a mosque. And you go, okay, but why? And then suddenly it accelerated like you couldn't believe, which is amazing. I mean, for the region, it's really good, because there's always been this tension. And I don't want to turn this into a political podcast or anything like that. That's not what we're here to talk about. But I think it frees up a lot of opportunity that were not there before. To work with, you know, Israeli technology. I mean, their technology is you know, quite amazing. Their startup scene is really amazing.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, to our discussion about startups, that could be a real game changer for the Middle 100%. East, because, you know, I was going to challenge you on that as well. You know, I like the challenge, but, but you know, there have been many countries or cities that wanted to become innovation hubs. Sure. And I've studied most of them, and, you know, they all succeed in their own way, but they never succeed the way they thought they would succeed. You know, very rarely, because you have to learn that you need to do the game your own way, and then you have to stimulate those founders, and they will kind of they will make their own companies, and it won't be, you can't sit down and programmatically say
100%. But that's why it's a policy oriented, and not, see, because it's a whole ecosystem, right? Yeah. You can have all the money in the world and you'll still make a terrible startup. You could have the best idea in the world, you don't have money, nothing's going to happen. You could have the best idea in the world and be a very immature founder and just, you know, spend all that money in a very foolish way. So without that sort of venture guidance, it's a maturing thing. It's going to take time. You need to have every element of the ecosystem there. And I think, and I do believe, that the policies that they've put in place, they're not trying to brute force it. They're letting everyone play their own game. Let money go where it will. The government's not picking winners, which you never want. You never want the government to pick a winner. That's always a bad sign. And they're just letting them play their own game. And that's why you have something like a Kareem, which got, you know, acquired by Uber. Carriage, which got acquired by, I think it was Deliveroo. So you are starting to see the sort of bigger companies, more mature companies come out. We have a long way to go, no mistake. But what makes Silicon Valley really unique is that ecosystem. And you can't just replicate that. You can't just do copy-paste.
That was my point. You can do great things, but you have to do different things.
It takes time.
And it takes time.
It takes time, and people have to realize, like, it's not like you're gonna say, oh, do you want to get that? Go for it. It's okay. Maybe another 15 minutes, because I have an interview with at 5, and I need to change and become more presentable. So I will
make a little note, because all of these breaks are like really, they have to.
I know, and they must really annoy you.
Yeah, they annoy me. That's perfect. Yeah, so you know, to continue on that point, as we're looking to the future, building innovation, an ecosystem of innovation throughout the Middle East, and indeed perhaps in every city in the Middle East in a different way. How is that going to play out? And let's look at it this way. What are the places in the Middle East that will benefit the most from this kind of thinking and will kind of evolve the quickest towards some innovative structure for startups?
If you were to ask me today, I would say Saudi Arabia will benefit the most. And the reason I say that is because, so Saudi Arabia, like Bahrain, has approximately a 60% population of locals. In Dubai, it's like maybe 20%. In Qatar, it's like 10% of locals. So it's a completely different atmosphere. So in Saudi Arabia, we actually need to have Saudis working and Saudis doing things. And these innovation hubs, I believe, are going to have two effects. One, it's going to stimulate young people to really say, okay, I still live at home, I have a little bit of cash, but I have a really good idea. I'm going to try and make it work. And if it doesn't, I'll get my government job or my corporate job or what have you. The second thing I think it will do is you have no idea how much stuff still gets done with paper. I'm serious. I mean, if you don't have a fax, it's odd. So innovation hubs, you don't have to make the next Uber or the next, huge multi-billion-dollar global company, but just a company that can solve small local problems will really help to make the countries better, right? It doesn't have to be, everybody wants to think about, be the next Apple or the next $1 trillion company. It's fine if you're a $100 million company working locally to just improve the way that the country operates and get more efficiency out of the country itself. So I would say Saudi benefits the most, maybe Oman as well. But in the end, all of them do. And any country that has an innovation center and an innovation mindset, and that doesn't just, tax startups into oblivion. A friend of mine was telling me the worst place he's ever had a startup is France. He says, great people, wonderful people. But I had a startup of 3 people, 3 employees. One was a rotten apple. I couldn't fire him. It created such an amount of tension in the company that I just had to close it, right? So you have to stimulate these kind of small companies to come up with new ideas, to get, in the case of France, maybe the next Renault or the next huge industry out of France. And the same thing is with the local businesses here. You have to stimulate it. You have to build legislation and incentives.
And people have to see the examples too, right? So Kareem does help, but
Big time.
But they were acquired. So again, there need to be companies that become their own powerhouses, and that can then spill over and inspire a lot of others. You've talked a good game for Bahrain. You've kind of talked them up in sort of saying that could be one of the centers.
I'm not sponsored, by the way. I'm not.
No, I understand that. What are some of the other places that will benefit the most? I mean, Dubai arguably already has, or at least before the last few years, was kind of the one in the lead in the sense that they had embraced a lot of these cosmopolitan tendencies, both in culture, commerce and innovation, arguably. But now you're saying this process is going to start happening and maybe mushrooming a little bit across the Middle East. What are some other cities in particular you think where you see, similar to the US, there's not just Silicon Valley anymore, right? There's kind of 5, 6, 7, 8 very powerful innovation ecosystems, be it Austin, Boston, New York, Chicago, and then even now Southern California really blossoming, then of course around Microsoft Seattle area.
It's difficult to say. So for example, if I were to say Bahrain, we just have one city. Saudi Arabia has 3 cities. Dubai is a city. So it's hard to say because the center of everything that's happening is literally in the places that we just mentioned. But the United Arab Emirates is not just Dubai. There's also Abu Dhabi. There's also Sharjah, Al Ain, those kind of places. I think what Saudi Arabia is trying to do, I don't know if you've heard of NEOM, but it's the city of the future.
I have. Have you had any involvement with that, or are you tracking it?
I'm tracking it very, very loosely.
That was one of my ambitions with this trip to get a little closer on some people who know something about that, because it would be a fantastic
Sure.
interview for for Futurized to think about that city.
Sure. I could get you someone.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. But you think that's real? It's not just a vision. It's this, because it's I've read the vision statement. I have watched the videos.
It's
I have
super-
seen the PR. The PR is
Fantastic.
it's there.
So I always liken it. Okay, so I worked in environment for a long time. Okay, at oil refineries, and oil refineries are always top notch on environment until the oil price goes down, and then nobody cares. I'm being purposely, but it's similar with these things. So Masdar was the original city of the future.
Right.
Do you remember in Abu Dhabi?
I remember that.
Yeah. And then the oil prices went down. We had the crisis, and so on and so forth. Now, it's still there, but it's not what the vision was. Now, I'm worried that...
What is it now?
I haven't been in a long time.
Yeah.
I think they still have a university, and I think they still have one or two projects, but it's not sort of the oasis of technological and zero emissions and green future that it was meant to be. It's just not there yet because of lack of investment. I'm worried the same will happen to NEOM because these things are not cheap. They're very, very expensive. And when you have on the one hand, a population that you need to take care of, you have to make tough decisions.
Let's just say that it did happen almost the way that the vision statement says. Would it then be worth it? Or do you think even the idea is a little too large for itself?
So
I'm not trying to lead the question. I literally don't know. I really am just trying to understand it.
No worries. The way I like to think about it is like this, because people always say that about Dubai. It's gonna fall apart.
Right. And it almost did, right, around the financial crisis, but that
Sure.
was kind of unbeknownst to anyone.
Sure. And they got out of it, and maybe there's another crisis coming. We don't know. But people like to make fun of Dubai. I know a lot of people that like to make fun of Dubai. Oh, the biggest building in the world, who cares? Oh, they have you seen the picture frame? There's this big picture frame buildings. You might have seen it on the way from the airport to here.
Yeah.
It's like a big golden frame.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. I was
Right.
wondering, the Arc de Triomphe,
Sure.
reminded me of Paris.
That's going to be my point. People are making fun of it because, why? What's the point? It's a lot of money. But people said the same thing about the Eiffel Tower. Now you would not dream of going to Paris as a tourist and not going to the Eiffel Tower. In 30 years, you won't dream of coming to the Middle East without going to the Burj Khalifa, or without going to the picture frame to take the picture of the city and posing with it, etc., etc. Similarly, I think visionary cities like NEOM, they sort of put a line in the sand of this is where we want to be, and it makes a statement, and I believe that we can especially as technologists we can sort of make fun of it or think about it like, oh, it'll never happen or it's too difficult, but I think if they achieve it, it's really going to sort of put them on the map as a country that really wants to push itself forward.
But you studied scenario theory, I know, for your
Sure.
master's. So what are the different scenarios? Because there is, of course, the progress scenario. What is the alternate scenario here?
There's the 4 quadrants, and you're going straight to the doom and gloom.
No, I'm saying there are other. We've been talking about the visionary scenario,
Sure.
but there are at least 2 or 3 others.
Sure. Look. Let's say we go with the middling scenario, because gloom and doom is literally war, which I'm not equipped to talk about.
Yeah, it's not so interesting to talk
Yeah.
about either. So let's settle for some of the others.
I would say probably, oil prices stay quite low. Governments have to balance their budget somehow. They continue to try to diversify. Governments are just made of people, and you can have visionary people or not, but they're just people. And they can also become bullish at some point and bearish at some point. And they might say to themselves, well, we could put a lot more money into NEOM, but we could also build another hospital or, go into steel manufacturing, which we need, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So I would say the middling scenario is where they just go halfway. And I don't believe halfway is going to make a successful city out of NEOM, which will mean it's just going to be, in my view, a white elephant. It's difficult to say. I mean, I haven't really planned the scenario out in my mind.
No, I'm challenging
taking the data points,
Yeah.
but it would end up being a white elephant. Especially with these kind of cities, it's all or nothing, right? Which is why Dubai went as far as it went. It's all or nothing. You're either on the map or you're not.
My last question for you,
Go for it.
Sidney, is going to be, if you want to try to stay up to date on the Middle East, on family office developments here, on innovation, where should one go? Where do you go when you obviously have unique access to individuals that are shaping this process, both locally and through your connections in the region, but for others who are more outsiders and they want to kind of tap into this region, what are the best ways to understand innovation in the Middle East right now?
That's a very good question. Look, there's very good websites right now that actually track startups throughout the Middle East. That actually visit from time to time. There's Startup, which follows all the startups in the Middle East and has a look at how they get funded. Sort of, let's say, a very early stage, Crunchbase kind of thing. The best way to really get your tap on it is just come to the Middle East. You just have to come. There's no other way to really get a feel for the place. Because the media doesn't really help you. I always laugh when I watch Mission Impossible. I think it was 5 or 6 or 4. I don't really remember. Where you have Tom Cruise running out of the tallest building in the world, and there's this big sandstorm, and he runs into a market with camels.
Yes.
And I don't know. Have you been to the Burj Khalifa? There are no camels. Right. So people get like a weird impression about the Middle East. It's not like that. Think of it like a cleaner New York, safer New York. Just come here, have a look, spend 2-3 days. Everybody in the ecosystem is so open to talking, is so open to expanding their view, is so open to meeting people. There's no better way than to just be here.
So that from a technology evangelist, we are back to visiting and face-to-face.
Well, it's interesting. Like we're at a conference today, right? Well, it's tomorrow, to be honest, but it officially starts
And
today.
we made great strides, I must say. We took COVID tests.
Yes.
We probably convinced our significant others and friends that this was worth it. And it's a very strange decision to make.
Well, I mean, this is like the 4th time I've traveled in the last month. So for me, it's less strange than the first time. But to me, it was worth the risk. And I'll explain that. When COVID first started and I was sort of trapped in my little office, I became extremely frustrated because I need to talk to people. I need to know what's going on.
Right.
So I set up hundreds of Zoom calls.
Yeah.
I just got on LinkedIn and just went nuts. Started adding people left and right because I was so frustrated. And those were great, don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. They literally pale in comparison to a face-to-face meeting. As digital as I want to be, I'm still an analog being, right? And I still need to see the person. I still, think about wearing masks. Like, it's not a big deal. I wear masks all the time. I literally think you should do it. It's the least you can do that has the most sort of toning down of the exponential growth factor, right? There's lots of data. Countries that wear masks sort of put it down. But you do cover about 40% of your nonverbal cues.
Yes.
And what I found out, which is really weird, when I order my Starbucks now, I literally can't hear the lady. It's weird. I can hear her in terms of actually hearing her, but I can't understand her.
I've had that same experience.
Isn't that odd?
Yeah, it's very strange.
We are so analog.
Well, yeah, I mean, we interpret... I think human beings, we interpret the signals we get. And when you get 100%. so much distortion or so much less, you have to think about it in a different way. Yeah,
it's really odd. So as much value as I see in Zoom, and I will definitely travel much, much less in the future. I signed a $200 million agreement over Zoom with a company that I ever met, which was great. But to me, that's an outlier.
Yeah.
So I will travel much less, but I still see the need to meet people, to engage them. I found that Zoom calls are very formal, whereas when you're having dinner with someone, you get taken into strange corners, and that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. So it's not just with new people that you'd like to meet them face to face, also with people getting to know them better.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. There's just something very magical about being with someone.
Yeah.
There's just something very. It's really where the creativity happens, right? That's why I'm not so convinced that we're in a zero office world. We're definitely still in a sort of officey world, much less probably.
Yeah.
But we still need to see each other.
So the office won't die. Cities won't die.
Cities will never die. No, cities will. I mean, people who say New York will die are just really not thinking right. It will not die. Maybe the old people will move out. Maybe worried people will move out. Young people
It'll be
will
a
move
rebirth
in.
more than a
100%. 100%. Who doesn't want to go live in New York when you're 19 years old?
So does that mean real estate will come back too?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
It's really hard to say. It's going to fluctuate. And again, whatever happened, whenever there's sort of this real estate problem, what happens? The very good buildings and the very prime properties and prime locations maintain their value. It's sort of the surrounding boroughs, suburbs that lose their value. So New York prime, maybe not. The boroughs might fluctuate.
I thank you very much for all these observations.
No problem. Anytime.
I'm glad we got to do this face to face.
Face to face, 100%.
Yeah. And it was a different conversation from the one we had virtually.
Honestly, yes.
Yeah.
I can't explain. Well, I can explain it, but it's just we are just very analog. Yeah. Who says it? Elon Musk said we're just meat bags, and the AI is going to wonder what these meat bags want. We're just analog meat bags, trying to live in a digital world.
Right. Well, I like meat bags in that.
Yeah.
In that
At the end of the day, yes.
Yeah. At the end 100%. Of the day. All right. Well,
thank you so much, Tron, for having me. Yes. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care.
Are you excited or curious about the future? Does your job depend on it? Futurized goes beneath the trends, tracking the underlying forces of disruption in tech, policy, business models, social dynamics, and the environment. I am Trond Arne Undheim, futurist, author, and serial entrepreneur, originally from Norway, now based outside of Boston. I'm the co-founder of Yegi, the discovery engine, with background from MIT's Startup Exchange, MIT's Sloan School of Management, WPP, Oracle, and the EU. I'm passionate about the societal impact of deep tech, such as AI, blockchain, IoT, life science, and robotics. Intrigued yet? Go to futurized.co to subscribe and listen in. On the show, I interview smart people with a soul, founders, authors, and executives. Futurized, a bi-weekly show preparing you to deal with disruption.
If you like the topic of investing, you may enjoy other similar episodes of Futurized, such as episode 5 on distributed finance, episode 15 on the future of pre-seed investing, episode 44 on the future of open finance, or episode 50 on the future of corporate venturing. If you enjoy the topic of the Middle East, you may enjoy other similar episodes of Futurized, such as episode 64 on startup mentoring in UAE, episode 62 on financial megatrends in the Middle East, or episode 61 on Arabian tech. Futurized, preparing you to deal with disruption.